Maria took her time with joy, but she couldn't completely hide it from herself either. It was a long-awaited event, which she was heading towards as if for a bright moment, as if anticipating that everything in her life would finally fall into place. Her son Alexander turned 45, and no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't hide the worry that was getting stronger every year. He didn't seem to know what to do with himself, and he was still in no hurry to start a family. Everything remained in place, and she, as a mother, waited for this moment with increasing patience over the years. But now, after so many years of waiting, Alexander finally announced that he was going to get married. Her heart sped up when he said those words, but at the same time, she felt a strange excitement that she couldn't explain. After all, it meant that everything would change in their lives, that it would not just be a wedding, but the beginning of a new chapter in which she would have to play a role. It was inevitable. Maria clenched her fists and tried to regain her composure, but her feelings, worries, and fears wouldn't let her go. The bride she was about to see was a full 12 years younger than her son. Her name was Elena, and according to Alexander, she was a beautiful girl. Maria, having heard this description, felt a strange anxiety. Beauty was important, of course, but her gaze was wary. Elena, she told herself, was beautiful, but too pretentious. She noticed how her son described the bride with warmth and reverence, but Maria found this beauty different from what she was used to seeing in women. Elena seemed to her too bright, too deliberately glamorous, and this pretentiousness raised questions in her soul. What is there behind this beauty? Thought Maria, trying to sort out these feelings in herself. Yes, she couldn't help but admit that the girl was pleasant to look at, but something about her behavior was immediately alarming. Elena was confident, as if she was used to being the center of attention, as if she knew how to hold the world in her hands. Maria couldn't get rid of the thought that this confidence seemed unnatural to her, something that was beyond what she thought was right. She didn't know why, but there was already some anxiety in her heart. When she met Elena, she was really beautifully dressed and looked well-groomed, but Maria increasingly felt her anxiety growing. Elena, with her slight smile and manner of speaking, as if every word was carefully thought out, gave the impression of a woman who skillfully handled people. But it was a kind of game. She was too confident for a girl her age. It was kind of unnatural. Maria felt uncomfortable. She was used to the fact that her son was looking for a bride among simple, warm women, those who could truly become her daughter. But here she saw a completely different world. A world where every detail, every phrase, every movement seemed designed to leave an indelible impression. Her son, the Alexander she had raised and loved, was now standing next to a woman who could take over all his decisions and behavior. Maria understood that her role in her son's life would be different now. This does not mean that she will sit on the sidelines. No, she'll be there, but maybe in a different way, in a way I hadn't imagined yet. Maria was left with thoughts that wouldn't let go of her. Everything was new, alien, and at the same time familiar. The one she raised suddenly became different. The woman she met could become a part of their lives, and Maria was ready for this, despite all her doubts. She knew that changes were coming in her life. And even if they were difficult, even if these changes carried ambiguity and confusion, she was ready to accept them. Alexander needed to build his life, and if he really wanted it to include this girl, then she had to put up with it. But the questions that had arisen in her soul remained, and she knew that the answers to them would be found, perhaps with time, or perhaps they would never be found. When Maria returned home after meeting her son's fiancé, her thoughts wouldn't let up. That evening was a turning point when she felt that her family's world had changed, and perhaps it would not return to its former course. Alexander, her beloved son, finally decided to take the step she had been waiting for all her life, but the path he chose seemed difficult to her, full of unknown and dangerous turns. And in this new world that was beginning to take shape around him, she needed to find her place. But how? How could she stay away when everything was happening so fast and so unexpectedly? Maria was not a woman prone to despair, But that evening, sitting at the kitchen table, she could not get rid of the feeling of anxiety. This anxiety, like a fog, enveloped her mind, giving her no peace. She was well aware that her role as a mother and a woman who had spent her entire life caring for her family had to change now. She couldn't let her son end up in a situation where she couldn't support him. But what if his choice, this girl with her carefree confidence, turns out to be not what Alexander needs? What if everything that seemed alien to her was actually hiding some deep contradictions? Maria left the table, went to the window and looked out. A plan was forming in her soul, an inescapable one and perhaps the only right one in her position. She decided that she would be with them, but not as an observer. Her place is at the center of the action. She couldn't let things take their course, couldn't afford to be a bystander. Maria has always believed that a family is not just a union of people by blood, it is an interaction that requires attention and care. And if her son decided to take such a step, she had to take responsibility for everything that would happen next. She needed to be there to protect him from possible mistakes, to preserve and not only love in their lives, but also harmony. And even if her presence would not always be appreciated, she was ready for anything. She thought for a long time about exactly how she could do it. Of course, she should have offered Alexander and his fiancée help, but not a simple one, but one that would be justified by reason and practicality. Maria knew that her apartment was spacious and cozy, and their small two-bedroom apartment, in which they were going to live, was not suitable for starting a family life. But that was only the first step. When she thought about how she could offer them her home, she realized that she would face difficulties. She was ready, but no matter how she had to face the rejection of their decision. She was sure that her proposal would be taken for granted, and she did not want her requests and initiatives to become a source of conflict. "I'll invite them to live with me," she said aloud, as if realizing it for herself, but for something more important. She immediately began to arrange all the details in her head. Their young family, he, and she, could live together. Why not? She had a house, her apartment was spacious, and she knew for sure that everyone could fit in there, her son and his fiancée. It might be difficult at first, but she believed that later, over time, they would be able to get used to it. What will it do? Maria was sure that eventually they would all learn to live together, and it would be much easier than if they lived in the clutches of a small two-bedroom apartment. The next day, when Alexander came to visit her, she decided to talk to him about it. Their conversation began with a light question, without apparent tension, but knowing her son's character, she understood that he might not take her offer quite the way she expected it. Maria sat in an armchair, feeling every look of her son, feeling how he was internally preparing for a reaction. "Mom, do you want to talk?" "What is it?" he asked, sitting down next to her. His voice was soft, but it was obvious that he was waiting for something specific from her. He was always like this, open, ready to listen, but always with an eye on his own space. "Yes, Alexander, I have something important to offer you," she replied, watching his face. "You know how much I hate it when you have to live in a small apartment. Elena will be uncomfortable." She paused, as if giving herself time to think before continuing. "I can offer you to live with me. I have a space. It will be more convenient for you and Elena, and it will be a temporary solution, but it will help." Alexander frowned in surprise. He hadn't expected such a suggestion, and his gaze became cautious, as if trying to comprehend all the possible consequences. "Mom, are you serious? Do you want us to live with you?" he asked, concern evident in his voice. "Yes, I'm sure that's the best option," she replied firmly, feeling that her words should be accepted as something completely logical. "I know it won't be easy, but I'm willing to do it for both of you. I can't stand to see you trying to create a home in such a cramped environment." Alexander was silent, but there was gratitude mixed with some doubt in his eyes. He understood that his mother could not offer this without deep thought, but at the same time, he did not know what to do with such a generous gesture. Maria knew that she would have to face resistance, but she was ready to accept it. It may be difficult at first, but eventually he and Elena will realize that her help was not just a blessing, but a necessity, without which their life in their new home would have remained unsatisfied. Everything inside Maria calmed down when she realized that she had taken the first step. And, as always, she was ready to continue, despite all possible difficulties. Maria couldn't sleep for a long time, lying in her room, covered with a blanket up to her ears, as if trying to hide from what awaited her in the future. There was a heavy thought in the air that her life would no longer be the same as before. The walls of her apartment, once filled with comfort and familiar objects, now seemed too empty, too clumsy. She began to realize that her role in the home of her son and daughter-in-law could change, and that she would have to take on a new duty, to live with them, to run the household, no matter what happened. This decision, so carefully considered, made her heart beat with anxiety and impatience. If she hadn't been a woman with a strong character, perhaps this transformation would have become unbearable for her, but she knew that she had no other way. Her whole life, her worries about her son and family, came down to supporting her relatives, and if they couldn't cope on their own, she had to be there for them. When the next day came, and she packed her things, preparing to go to Mark and his wife, her soul was filled with a strange premonition, the feeling that she had made the right step after all, but did not fully understand what awaits her in her new home. With every step she took towards her new life, it became clearer to her that her plan would not be so easy for everyone. But she was determined, confident in her abilities, because after all, she is not only a mother, but also the mistress of her own destiny. When she finally arrived at Mark's place, her arrival was met with restraint. The youngest son and his wife were not ready for the changes yet, but Maria was not going to back down. She couldn't afford such a defeat, even if her presence seemed unwelcome. As soon as she crossed the threshold of their small rented apartment, she immediately noticed the disorder in the corner of the hallway, several pairs of shoes scattered on the floor, and dirty footprints on the carpet, which, in her opinion, should have been thrown away long ago. "How could you leave everything in this state?" she said, almost with annoyance, looking around. Her voice didn't sound like a question, but a statement, like a small battle she had to win. Her eyes swept across the room, searching for flaws. "Well, it's not a house, it's an apartment that would have to be put in order," she added, pronouncing the words as if she no longer expected an answer. Mark, standing next to her, just remained silent. He had long been used to a lot of comments from his mother, and each time he hoped that she would calm down soon. But it didn't happen. She began to check every shelf, every drawer, and her words became sharper and her gaze became colder. Anna, who was standing in the kitchen, felt the air in the apartment immediately become heavy. Her patience was running out. But despite this, she politely approached Maria, trying to maintain respect. "Mom, would you like to rest for a while? I made tea to make you feel comfortable." She tried to intervene, hoping to soften the mood, but her words seemed to disappear into thin air, finding no response. "Tea?" Maria asked. "Do you think I don't have time for tea? I need to sort out this apartment. And look at the kitchen. How can you cook in such close quarters?" she added, her voice not only critical, but also a hidden threat that her presence would be constant and inevitable. She was not used to hiding her emotions, and it was possible to feel her energy flooding the house. Anna involuntarily pressed her lips together, but instead of responding sharply, she decided to remain silent. She knew that any reaction to criticism would only make the situation worse, and she tried to return to her usual role as a daughter-in-law who patiently listens to her mother-in-law. Maria, meanwhile, decided that she needed to act even more decisively, went to the refrigerator, opened its door and began examining the contents as she went. She could not understand how one could live without organizing everything properly, as she did herself, always observing order and cleanliness. New plans were already beginning to take shape in her head. The time has come to put things in order. "Let's see how much normal food is left here," she said, taking out several cans of canned food and bags of frozen food. "You can't do that. You know that you need to cook properly, not haphazardly." Anna felt her patience almost at its limit. She knew that her mother-in-law would never hold back her remarks, but each time her irritation grew stronger. It was like an unstoppable movement that became more difficult to contain with every word. Meanwhile, Mark was silent again. He didn't say anything because he knew that his mother could continue to criticize indefinitely if she wasn't shown that she didn't have the right to control everything. He wasn't sure what to do, but he knew one thing: he couldn't stop her. If he didn't want to, it wouldn't work. Maria continued to explore the apartment, checking every detail, every little thing, expressing her complaints. She took up a book, she checked every closet, offering her advice, which, as it seemed to her, were not only appropriate, but also necessary for a good life. "Well, a man can't live in peace without knowing where his things are," she said, grinning to herself, proud of her organization. When her gaze stopped at the kitchen again, she realized that she would have to take over the organization of this space. "I can do better," she thought confidently, as if she were saying it out loud. Tomorrow she planned to start rearranging the furniture, making the kitchen more spacious and comfortable. And at that moment, when her thoughts turned to the next plans, she heard Anna's footsteps, who finally came up to her and said restrainedly, "Mom, if you want to help, maybe we should just discuss how we can improve the space for everyone." But Maria, without taking her eyes off the stove, only replied gloomily, "To discuss? I already know what needs to be done. You'd better listen and don't ask unnecessary questions." The day Maria entered the kitchen, the feeling of dominance became an indisputable truth for her. It was not just a space for cooking, but a whole territory that had to obey her rules and habits. The kitchen in Mark and Anna's apartment was quite compact, as if it had been created for two people, no more. Maria was used to a large room where every corner was reserved for special needs: cabinets, shelves, tables, illuminated from all sides, like in her own apartment, where every process was clearly planned and structured. Here, in her son's apartment, everything looked modest, and she couldn't help but think that such a small kitchen couldn't possibly provide a fulfilling life for the family. She opened the refrigerator door, and her gaze immediately stopped on the pack of milk, which was already beginning to lose its freshness. Maria furrowed her brows with obvious displeasure and, almost oblivious to the fact that her actions could cause dissatisfaction, said loudly, "Milk. How can you live with such milk? Don't you realize that it must be used within 2 days? You don't live like that." Anna, hearing this reproach, could not help but feel her nerves tighten like a string, and she, restraining herself, approached her mother-in-law. "Maria, we just didn't have time to use this milk. We have everything in order with the groceries," she tried to explain calmly, feeling that her every word was dissolving into the onslaught of her mother-in-law. However, Maria did not pay attention to Anna's words, but continued her research on the kitchen, paying attention to every seemingly minor flaw. She picked up a spoon from the table and slowly, as if aware of her power, carefully checked how clean it was. There was a slight trace of irony on her face. "Look at that spoon. Can't you keep order? In our family, everyone always looked after cleanliness and order." "It's elementary," she said with a note of superiority, looking back at Anna, despite her patience, was beginning to feel more and more strongly how her tolerance was coming to an end. "You're right, Maria," Anna replied with restraint. "It's just that I'm used to cooking with my soul, and not according to the list." She tried to put into these words not only her views, but also to show that, after all, it is also important to her how the food is prepared, and not just mechanical cleaning or following the rules. Maria did not respond immediately. As always, she pretended not to notice the hints of displeasure, continuing to inspect the kitchen with a truly masterly gaze. She resolutely turned to the stove, again emphasizing the importance of proper cooking. "You need to cook properly, not just throw food in the pan," she said, shaking her head. Everything should be fried so that the food retains its taste and nutrients. Don't you understand that? Her voice was full of self-righteousness. She spoke as if it was knowledge passed down through the generations. Anna felt her chest tighten as her choices about diet and health were ignored as if they didn't matter. She decided not to argue or escalate the conflict, even though her inner tension was becoming more pronounced. She understood that her mother-in-law had a strong personality, and that any interference in household affairs was perceived as a threat, as a test of strength. But she couldn't accept that the food she cooked had to be fried and greasy. "I'm trying to stick to a diet," Anna finally said, without raising her voice. "I can't eat too much fat. I have my own preferences." Maria was silent for a moment. Her gaze darkened, but she was in no hurry to answer. She turned to the stove and, frowning, continued. "Diet? What is it for? Do you think you can live with that kind of food? When I was your age, we all ate fried meat, and nothing happened, everyone was alive. And now you're all with your diets and rejections of normal food." Anna felt her tolerance for criticism had reached its limit, but she forced herself to remain calm. She had already realized that her mother-in-law would not appreciate her desire for ease in eating, and that fighting for it was a waste of energy. She just didn't want every day of her life to turn into an exam. "All I want is for everyone to feel comfortable." "I'm not trying to break your habits, Maria," Anna said calmly, but with a slight emphasis, not knowing how much longer she could endure such remarks. There was silence in the kitchen. Maria felt the tension in the air and suddenly turned to her. There was something strange in her eyes, more regret than annoyance. Her voice became quieter, almost restrained, but with a clear implication that she still considered her advice to be correct. "You have to understand that I'm saying this with care. You're not alone, now everything should be real between us." Anna nodded, feeling that this was just another way for her mother-in-law to justify her actions, as if she was just doing what was best for everyone. And despite everything, it bothered her. "I know," she said softly. "But let's try to respect each other's opinions." It was the last attempt to find a common language. Maria was sitting in an armchair placed by the window, which overlooked the courtyard, where the neighborhood children were playing with a ball. She was used to this view in her own way, the old courtyard, the same old trees, the cracked paths, and, of course, the details that raised doubts were not hidden from her eyes, the dilapidated facade of the house, the battered roof, the gaudily painted windows. She always felt in these little things something unfinished, devoid of character, something important and essential that gives the house a true comfort. Not like in her apartment, where every place had its own purpose, where every detail was carefully thought out, everything in its place. In the son and daughter-in-law's house, everything was so vague, with incomplete shapes and empty corners that were just called to be filled in. But nothing could be changed quickly, so Maria decided to start small, because even in these conditions she could easily show that she knows how to properly arrange a house. Her attention was drawn back to the small, haphazardly folded laundry lying on the chair. She couldn't just leave him without fixing him. Is it really impossible to leave a little order, at least in something? Small details became so important to her that sometimes it seemed as if every object in the apartment could affect the very atmosphere of their lives. As soon as she sat down, she stood up resolutely and began putting things on the shelves, although she clearly had no right to dispose of other people's things in someone else's house. But the instinctive desire to restore order did not leave her. She took several books from the shelf, folded them neatly and turned to the right, then headed to the shelves with dishes, where she noticed another element that could not pass her attention, several cups standing randomly on top of each other. "How can you do that? It's impossible to live like this," she told herself. "If only I were the mistress here." Suddenly Anna came into the room. Maria turned around, and her gaze, although sharp, expressed neither anger nor annoyance, but rather self-satisfaction. She seemed confident that her actions were not only justified, but also necessary for their common good. You don't mind if I clean up a bit, do you? Maria asked with a soft smile that looked more like a small victory. Anna, somewhat tired from repeated encounters with her mother-in-law, held back a heavy sigh. This was not just a response to Maria's specific action, but rather her daily internal conflict, which seemed to only grow with each new intervention. Of course, if that's what you want. Anna replied, but her voice was hardly joyful. Maria, despite her outward appearance of gentleness, continued her manipulations, as if she did not even notice that her actions were irritating. Her focus was solely on what she was doing, how she was doing it, and how right it was. She did not hear what Anna was saying, did not notice her eyes full of fatigue. Everything was clear in her head, and her inner world recognized no other options than her own. You know, it seems to me that I would have arranged things here quite differently, Maria continued, sorting through the cups. This space needs decency. You see, Anna, if only we had paid more attention to the little things, everything would have been different. Anna felt her irritation grow. She walked into the kitchen and heard her mother-in-law continuing her remarks without even waiting for an answer. It wasn't just a conversation, it was a stream of incessant instructions, every word of which penetrated her mind, causing more and more tension. Why don't you suggest that Mark get more rest instead of dealing with such small things? He gets tired too. Anna tried to change the subject somehow, but she couldn't help but notice how Maria continued her occupation without stopping. Mark? He's a little weak here. I've always had a strict order, and there should always be clear roles in the house, Maria replied, as if defending her parenting methods. She didn't take any objections. Her opinion was the only true one for her. Maria continued to study the cups carefully, as if it were nothing more than the most important element of their lives. Anna was silent, feeling her tolerance gradually melt away. She tried to find the strength and patience not to get into conflict, but her thoughts were confused. As soon as Maria began to interfere in their personal space, she felt that her own boundaries were being erased, and she found herself in a situation where someone was always trying to change her place. Maria, noticing her daughter-in-law's silence, did not stop her process of restoring order. She was absorbed in this process, as if it was important not only for her, but for everyone around her. Do you mind anyway? She asked, not noticing that the question sounded like a test, which again left no choice. Anna shook her head, realizing that no matter how much she tried to maintain tolerance, a rift had appeared in their relationship, which was no longer so easy to hide. As always, the morning hours were a time of special reflection for Maria. She didn't like haste and fuss. For her, time was like nothing else, the need to sort out all this awkward life, in which small details sometimes played a more significant role than big events. The kitchen window was wide open, and in the fresh air, as if deliberately escaping her attention, some kind of pollen flew like light messengers of change. She was standing at the table, spreading bread on the board, preparing the very breakfast that, in her opinion, was supposed to give everyone the necessary mood for the whole day. But, as often happened, there was a certain silence in the house, and this silence, more like suffocation, was clearly not the atmosphere in which her daughter-in-law could feel calm and confident. Anna was back in the kitchen, but her presence felt rather cold, like something superfluous that had no right to exist in this space full of confidence and organization that Maria created. When Anna entered the kitchen, slightly opening the door, Maria did not turn to her. All her attention was absorbed in slicing bread. She slowly, with keen attention, putting each slice in perfect sequence, thought about how to make the house more harmonious and the daughter-in-law more obedient. Don't you think this is too much? Anna's voice cut through the tense silence like lightning, illuminating the void between them. Maria, without looking up from her work, replied as if she hadn't heard any dissatisfaction or reproach in Anna's tone at all. Why are you starting again? She said shortly, cutting off another piece of bread and putting it on a plate. You know that our house has always had a tradition. Everything should be properly organized. And nothing will work if there is no order. Do you understand? Anna stood to the side, her fingers clenched so that her nails were white with tension. She felt her patience melting away with every word her mother-in-law said, like an icy stream rushing to its breaking point. Maria was not only confident that she was right, but she was also ready to put everything on the line to prove that her experience, as always, was absolutely right. There was no doubt in her eyes, and there was not the slightest hint of respect for the opinions of others in her tone. Even though she was standing in someone else's house, she felt like the master of the situation, and Anna was just a guest. You say the same thing every day, Maria. And, to be honest, I'm tired of it. Anna couldn't stand it. Her voice trembled a little, but it was firm. Maria raised an eyebrow slightly, not expecting such bluntness, but nevertheless showed neither surprise nor indignation. She continued to do what she saw fit, as if only her actions mattered. You don't understand me, she said in response, pausing, as if expecting Anna to apologize for her impertinent behavior. Those who do not know how to organize a space cannot create comfort in a house. And you don't seem to understand that I'm just trying to help you. You stopped helping a long time ago, Anna whispered, but feeling that it was not worth continuing this discussion in that tone, she tried to pull herself together. You know I don't mind your advice, but I need some space for myself. Maria raised her head, and her gaze was full of bewilderment. For her, space was something obvious that could not be discussed, much less demanded. She was convinced that her advice was not just a request, but a necessity that could not be disputed. You just don't know how to accept help, she concluded. When I needed it, I didn't ask for help either, I just acted. But you're probably too soft for that. Anna tried to contain the indignation that was building up inside her. She understood that this could not go on like this, and she would need to put an end to this endless struggle for her boundaries. Maybe I just don't like it when people interfere in my personal life, she said with a tight smile, trying to speak calmly, but her words, as it turned out, hit exactly the target. Maria paused, and then calmly, almost with a smile, said, "Personal life." She thought for a few seconds, but apparently did not find anything new in this phrase, continuing with the same calmness as before. You'll still appreciate my advice. Time will tell. Anna, suppressing the urge to object, slowly headed for the door, as if she knew that words would not help here. Maria watched her go, and her gaze was full of confidence that she had done everything she had to do. There was no other way for her. When the door closed, Maria was left alone in silence, her heart filled with peace. In her house, even if it was not hers, there should always be harmony, and if it has to be achieved through efforts and interventions, then so be it. There was always silence in that house, but it was special, not ominous, but viscous, barely perceptible. It filled the rooms and corners, as if space stood still, not subject to time or change. At times it seemed that nothing new could happen in this house, and every step, every word had long been predicted. But then, suddenly, as if out of nowhere, everything changed. Anna, feeling the day dragging on like a long thread in which every moment is just a repetition of the previous one, began to think. She got up one morning with unusual determination and felt something new growing in her chest that had long been forgotten. She couldn't name exactly what it was, but she knew one thing: her life wasn't the same as it used to be. There was an elusive change in the air, as if the house had become a living being, exhaling a strange premonition of change, forever changing the usual course of things. Anna stood at the window, peering into the fog that enveloped the land behind the house, and in this gray haze she was not looking for meaning, but was looking for a way. The same path she once had, when she was still convinced that life could be different. She did not know where this new day would lead her, but she felt that the moment had come to act. She returned to the house, as if pierced by a sense of her own importance. Paradoxical as it may sound, the realization flashed through her mind that if she didn't change anything in her life now, there would be nothing she could change later. On the path of change, Anna understood one thing: she needed to start with herself. When she entered the room, she immediately felt the heavy silence, which was now becoming more dense. Maria sat by the window, leisurely fingering the threads, filling these hours with her measured rhythm, and Anna stood on the threshold, thinking how to start a conversation that had been brewing for a long time. Maria looked up, and her eyes were full of the same confidence as always, but this time there was a certain shadow of doubt in her gaze, as if she was finally beginning to feel that her world was no longer so firm and unshakable. "Is there something you want to say?" "What is it?" she asked, without taking her eyes off the threads. Anna felt her heart beating faster, and every step she took along this path became more difficult, but inevitable. "I want to talk." Her voice was low but determined. "About what doesn't suit me. That something needs to change." Maria didn't seem surprised. She carefully put down her studies and, putting her hands on her knees, listened, as if waiting for these words. "Do you think I haven't noticed how you're changing?" she said, showing neither anger nor annoyance. "You're trying to be different, but is it really necessary? Tell me, don't you understand that everything I do for your own good?" Anna felt as if her words, which she had been preparing for so long, were expelling something unnecessary from her soul. She looked into her mother-in-law's eyes and, sensing this strange misunderstanding between them, said, "You don't understand, Maria, that I don't want to live the way you want. I don't want to be your shadow. I want to be myself. I can't stay in this house if everything is going to be according to your rules." Maria, hearing these words, tensed up a little, but despite this, she did not lose her composure. "You don't understand how you're acting," she said, and there was that worry in her voice again that she was having a hard time hiding. "You don't know how things work. I know how to do it, because life teaches." Anna stood clutching the edge of her blouse in her hands, and felt a hurricane of emotions growing in her chest, which, as it seemed to her, flooded her with her head. Her calmness had long since left her. It was the moment when she realized that if she didn't say everything that had accumulated in her soul, she would simply drown in this burden. "But you didn't take into account that I can make my own decisions. I don't have to follow your rules, Maria. I need to make my life real. And this is not your life." Her words became more confident by the minute. She was not afraid. A new man was born inside her, free and strong. Maria seemed confused. She was silent for a long time, choosing her words, as if she was looking for the right answer, but her face gradually changed. This confidence, which she used to be so proud of, began to crack. "Have you always been like this?" Her voice was not as firm as before. "I thought you'd understand. You're not alone. We're all here, and it's not just a home, it's a family." Anna shook her head, not knowing what to say. Maria seemed to be trying to find a clue to convince her again, but Anna was no longer listening. "I need to be myself, Maria. I need to take this step. And if you can't understand what I want, then I can't be here anymore." Maria stood up, her face cold and even a little strange, as if she had lost her foothold. She did not expect that her confidence, which had been built over the years, would be questioned with such words. But despite everything she felt, she remained steadfast as always. "So be it," she whispered, though there was no determination in her words, only disappointment. "Just remember that life doesn't always happen the way you want it to." Anna looked at her in silence, knowing that this conversation had become a point of no return. There was something different between them now, something irresistible. And although she couldn't figure out exactly how events would unfold, she already felt that the path she had chosen was her own, and she was ready to go all the way. Maria stood on the balcony, arms crossed over her chest, and stared into the void. The wind, playing with her hair, seemed to be trying to take her into these empty spaces, somewhere beyond this house, beyond the views that she had been protecting for so long. There was a mixture of annoyance and bewilderment in her eyes, as if she couldn't believe that events were unfolding this way. Life had put her through a test, and now, on the threshold of a new age, she stood alone, misunderstood, and perhaps even lost. The silence in the house began to weigh on her. She felt like she was breathing heavily, as if the air had become too thick, and the room that had been her refuge for so long was now a mute witness to the inevitable changes. Maria did not immediately realize that everything she had built over the years was crumbling right in front of her eyes. Anna left. It wasn't a surprise, but it was painfully real, like it was a blow she couldn't have predicted. She understood that something needed to be done now, something decisive, but the inner sense of hopelessness she faced did not allow her to act immediately. Her gaze turned towards the garden path, along which she herself had once walked, confident that her life would be the same as this house, calm, measured, without surprises. But Anna destroyed this cozy world, threw her off balance, putting her in front of a choice that she didn't know how to handle. Maria took a step towards the door, as if averting her gaze from what was happening in her soul. She returned to the house, but she felt that something had changed in her perception. The echoes of his conversation with Anna were still ringing in his head. The words slammed into her mind like relentless lightning. "I can't be here anymore." These words wouldn't disappear, despite her efforts. She cautiously entered the living room, where there was no one at that moment, but the smell of fresh coffee reminded her of recent conversations that would not happen again. Her hands reached for the cup of their own accord, and she took a sip, not noticing how her fingers were shaking. It was too hot, but when she felt it revitalize her, she realized that this taste was a symbol of some invisible barrier that separated her from what she had known before. She suddenly felt that she needed to talk, to find answers. Not waiting for the noise of street life, Maria decided to act. There was a clear understanding in her head that time was running out, and if she didn't take this step, everything would be lost. She took out her mobile phone and dialed the number without hesitation. The beeps in the headphones, which were interrupted and sometimes interrupted by silence, were a familiar sound. But when a voice came on the other end of the phone, she realized that nothing would ever be the same again. "Yes," replied the one she was waiting for. "Pavel, I need you to come." She said these words with obvious tension, not knowing what to say next. She did not explain the reason. She didn't want to talk about something so personal over the phone. All she could do at that moment was to name her request. The pause, as if Pavel himself was trying to figure out what kind of unexpected call it was, lasted too long, and Maria began to get nervous, feeling like time was against her. Finally, a different tone was heard in the other's voice. "I understand. I'll be there." These words brought her out of the long silence. She put down her phone, and something seemed to tighten in her chest, as if it was an assignment that she couldn't cancel. It was the beginning of something new, something she couldn't have predicted. Pavel, the man she trusted, was someone she could talk to openly without fear of anyone laughing or judging her. He was an old friend of hers, with whom their connections had always been pure and real. His arrival was the only solution that, as it seemed to her, could somehow clarify the situation, resolve this whirlpool of feelings and thoughts that filled her soul. She looked out the window again. But now she didn't see the same garden landscape that used to calm her gaze. The whole picture was suddenly filled with different colors. She realized that her life was now at a crossroads, and the path she had to take would not be easy. Maria slowly returned to the table, where she had left her coffee cup. Her hand trembled slightly as she tried to put the cup back in its place. And then, as if without any volition, her gaze stopped on something. There was a photograph in the corner of the table, in black and white, from previous years. It showed her and Pavel, and next to them was an old house that had been filled with light and laughter in the past. And now, in that moment, Maria suddenly realized how many years had passed, how everything had changed, and she still remained in her place, frozen in her familiar world. Tears began to play in her eyes again, but this time they were not bitter, but filled with understanding, that the past was not eternal, and it had to retreat before the new, before what she had to create herself. The doorbell rang, interrupting her thoughts. It was Pavel. He stood in the doorway, smiling discreetly. His gaze was clear and determined, but there was a depth to it that hid more than he was willing to say. Maria, without saying a word, took a step aside and motioned for him to enter. This was the moment when she needed to come to an answer, and only he could help her find it. "What happened?" he asked, his voice calm, as if he already knew something was about to change. Maria silently led him into the living room, and they sat down opposite each other. There was no fear in her gaze, but there was an indefinite but strong question: what to do now, how to move forward, when everything she knew was suddenly in doubt. The words began to sound, but now they were different, without the usual confidence, without memorization. And this conversation was the first step in a new time, which will begin to be built not according to plan, but according to the dictates of fate.